Think you can start a business with $75? In some parts of the world, that's a small fortune. Next on Global Perspectives, we'll talk to a man who knows.
This program was made possible by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office.
Hello and welcome to the Global Perspectives Show. I'm John Bercia, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at the University of Central Florida. Our guest today is Alex Counts, President and CEO of the Grameen Foundation. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Counts.
It's my pleasure.
Tell us about the Grameen Foundation and its origins and a little bit about microfinance.
Well, microfinance is a classic story of self-help, of finding a way to enable the people who are affected by the problem, poverty, to be at the center of changing it for their families, for their communities. And it's basically a financing strategy allowing people to tap into their entrepreneurial talents to earn money to get out of poverty. And I went almost 25 years ago to visit and be a Fulbright scholar with Grameen Bank. I learned everything about the organization. This was one of the microfinance pioneers. And then 14 years ago, my wife and I moved back. We had an incredible experience working with Professor Mohammed Yunus and his colleagues and immersed ourselves in microfinance. And we set up an organization to help those groups who are trying to apply the microfinance strategy in other poor countries, in India and Nigeria and Mexico, help them grow and help them have a huge impact on their poverty situation. And we never looked back. We've had a lot of successes in taking this social innovation global.
Now, most of our viewers will have heard about Mohammed Yunus, but for those who may not have, tell us a little bit about him and his extraordinary achievements and how he has become essentially a household name in the 21st century.
Well, you know, before he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006, he'd been kind of working away. You know, he was educated in the United States and at Vanderbilt University, went home after his country became independent to teach economics, thinking that that was a good way to build a kind of a network of Bangladeshi economists who could analyze the situation, put together the right policies. And he found that that was kind of empty. And he found that 3 years after moving back, that people were literally dying from hunger outside of his classroom, within sight of his, you know, being there teaching. And he went out and he started interviewing people, and he found that many people were very skilled artisans, but they lacked the capital, only a few dollars at that exchange rate at that time, to break free from money lenders and loan sharks who were the ones getting rich off of their skills. So he started lending in '76 and '77 and asked the banks to take over his program and said, you guys do this. This can be a real engine of our economic growth and poverty reduction. They thought it was a crazy idea, lending to illiterate women. And so he said, well, I'm going to create my own bank then. And got a banking license in 1983 and basically kept innovating the model and building up other organizations that could complement it. But at the core of it, it's a financing strategy to support self-help and became better known. There was a 60 Minutes piece that I was part of back in 1990 that brought it attention, and then the Nobel Peace Prize really put it on a kind of a global stage. And people sometimes mix up the country, India, Bangladesh a little bit, but it became very widely known from that, and a whole new era of people trying to apply it across, you know, the developing world, and even in some you know, U.S. cities and European cities where there's poverty.
Explain to us how the microfinance concept works. To the average person, it would seem that these are really tiny amounts of money, and it's incredible how much good they can do.
Well, a typical microloan in Bangladesh or India might begin at first loan for a woman who's getting started, $50, $75, $100 maximum. It can grow quickly to hundreds, even a couple $1,000s for the ones that show a lot of promise as an entrepreneur. Basically, a woman in a village, you know, one day she might see an educated guy show up on a bicycle, and he would call together a community meeting and said, I'm here to lend money to people who normally wouldn't even feel comfortable walking into a bank. If it might be a bank somewhere within 10 or 20 miles. But we're here to come to your doorstep and to finance the activities that you know how to do. And people would think he was some sort of, there on some sort of a scam. Because who comes to the doorstep of a poor village and poor people, and especially women, and says, we want to finance you? But he kind of, she would continue to see him come back a couple times, nearby villages, and ultimately, they'd have a conversation, might go like this. She'd say, you want to talk to the wealthy people in the village, you want to talk to my husband, and I don't know business. And he would say, well, business, don't think about business. How do you survive? Do you have a job? Do you have a social kind of payment from the government? No. Well, I raise chickens and I sell the eggs and scrape by that way. He says, what if I gave you $50 to buy some chicks, raise chickens, sell them in the market? Could you do that? I can do, of course I can do that. I've been doing that all my life. Well, what if you had more chickens and could do it on a bigger scale? Well, the next thing you know, with a loan, that woman might have a poultry farm of 20 chickens, and I've seen ones 400 or 500 where a woman never had more than a couple of chickens to begin with. And so that's how it gets going. Not everyone, people get climbing on the ladder to get out of poverty. Some are fast climbers, some are slow climbers, some fall off and have to get back on. But finance, as important it is for you and me to be able to buy a car, buy a home, go for an education, all the things for a poor woman who has to, by definition, an entrepreneur. There's no jobs for her. It's even more important, and that's what Grameen does. It injects capital in a capital-starved economy, and it lets the poorest people benefit first.
So tell us about the bank and the Grameen Foundation where you work. How did the Grameen Foundation come to join the bank and its undertakings?
Well, microfinance, especially kind of practiced by Grameen Bank, is what I would call a social innovation. It's kind of re-engineering a process finance that's been with us for most of human history, but re-engineering it to benefit the poor. And it had reached significant scale in Bangladesh, and people have been calling kind of poverty experts saying, we need to take this strategy global. It had worked so well in one country. There was nothing particular about Bangladesh. In fact, some thought there was. Some thought it wouldn't travel well. So we took a risk, and right after a big global conference on poverty and microfinance in 1997, we said, we're going to set up an organization. I had a tiny little seed funding of $6,000 that was arranged by Professor Yunus. And we said, we're going to try to mobilize people and volunteers and corporations and universities and donors to put some money behind people who were trying to make microfinance work outside of Bangladesh, to prove that this social innovation could travel across borders, could be adapted. And we've seen extremely strong evidence last 14 years that microfinance in some ways even works better in some countries than in Bangladesh. But certainly it is a kind of a global phenomenon now, and we've played our small role in that. But basically we don't give loans to poor women in any country. Unlike Grameen Bank, which does that in Bangladesh on a massive scale, 8 million borrowers, makes a profit. It's owned by the poor. It has more than $1 billion in savings. They're a retail bank. We will operate at the global level to be a kind of a strategic partner to people applying that strategy in other places. And it's just been so good to see people who kind of fashion themselves as the Muhammad Yunus of Nigeria or Haiti or India, go from very small beginnings, and with our help and mostly with their own drive and desire to impact poverty, for them to become massive success stories in their own countries.
You mentioned the number of people being helped in Bangladesh. Is there an approximate estimate for how many are being helped by microfinancing worldwide?
Yeah. What we've tried to do is we've tried to make sure that microfinance, that we track how many people are benefiting from microfinance that are among the extreme poor, because it can be, when it's delivered in the right way, be a very powerful means for not just the moderate poor, not just the people above the poverty line, but the hardcore poor to get out of poverty. So we set a goal right when Grameen Foundation was born to reach 100 million of the world's poorest families with credit and other services like savings and insurance that are very powerful also. And we set the goal for 2005, and we missed the date, but it was an extremely aggressive goal. And we reached it right around the time that Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize, the end of 2006, so just coincidentally. And since then, it's grown to more than about 120 million families reached. And then beyond that, there are some tens of millions who are reached who didn't start as a hardcore poor, but started and still were, by our standards, disadvantaged. So we're talking about something that's, certainly well above 150 million families, which is, you're talking about 5 people to a family. You're talking over 700 million people. So it's gone well beyond a phenomenon just in 1 or 2 countries. It's really reaching, again, well over 500 million people. And the innovation going on every day, because we share learnings and best practices, the strategy itself is continuing to improve.
How does that number compare with the need out there in the world? Is it 25%?
It's, we're talking about a little over 20%, 1 in 5 families that are living under $2 a day have access to it. The numbers are a little soft. There's some overlap where the same person might be borrowing from 2 organizations, but let's say that that it's between 1/5 and 1/4. So that's significant. I mean, there are 3 billion poor people in the world and composed of about 600 million families. So that's an exciting achievement, and yet there's a long way to go. Now, not everyone among even the moderate or hardcore poor is going to want to go this route. Some of them may want to get jobs, even work for a micro-entrepreneur. So we don't feel that we need to necessarily cover every single person. But in Bangladesh, which has continued to grow, they've reached almost every poor family. And what they find is that entrepreneurial spirit is a really key part of the character of the Bangladeshis that no one really knew, but then they hadn't had the chance, and they certainly hadn't had the finance. So, we certainly see that once we get to 50, 60, maybe 2/3 of the poor families have access to a micro loan and certainly a micro savings account, we'll have really broken the back of one aspect, one dimension of poverty, and can put us on a path to having a world where there'll always be relative poverty, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll always be absolute poverty where people just can't get their basic needs met. That's a vision that I hope in my lifetime, and I hope even before I get too far into my lifetime, that we'll be able to realize. Professor Yunus, having seen so many lives transferred, he talks about one day we're going to create a poverty museum, and that will be the only place where we'll be able to find it. And it's a really compelling vision that's motivated me and many others.
Well, let's say I'm a poor person living in Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, somewhere in South Asia, and I hear by word of mouth that this exists. How do I find you? And then after finding you, sort of walk me through the process of what would happen.
Sure. Basically, microfinance loan officer generally will find the person. It's a big outreach effort because people don't believe that this is real. There are politicians and others promised loans, promised resources. They never deliver. So a micro loan officer will come to a woman's house, meet with her neighbors, tell them about it, repeatedly do that. Sometimes a woman will hear from her neighbors. She'll have missed this community meeting, so she'll hear about it. And after the initial skepticism goes off and the people want to make a try, all the rumors that circulate in the village, this is some way to convert people to another religion or other things, sell them into slavery, those people stop believing in those. And so a woman might, in a Grameen system, join a solidarity group, we call it. And it's a group of other women who they trust, who basically all approve each other's business plans. So in order to get that first loan of $50 to start a poultry farm, it needs to be vetted by the people there to prove to people they've known all their lives that they actually are good at raising chickens or whatever, have a little 5 and 10 shop or whatever the business happens to be. And then once you form that group of trusting people, and if you're not known as a hard worker in the village or a trustworthy person, you can't find a group. The society says you need to reform your ways until you can join this. Then everyone gets their loans after they go through a kind of training process, orientation about what Grameen is. invest the money, pay it back over 6 months to a year, and then they can become eligible for a second loan, which is normally larger. So if they've had success, they can reinvest, start another business, increase the size of theirs. The other women are doing their whatever they invested their money in. And the cycle continues every year. There's a replenishment of capital, savings is deposited, so an asset is built up. When one woman falls into difficulty, the other women are expected to help her recover. And if she can't recover quickly, the bank can reschedule her loan so it doesn't become a hardship. So basically, for just like a line of credit from a bank is important for business people here, and just like peer support, a kind of a Rotary Club or a business groups that actually can help business people who may compete in some way, but also have a common interest in building up the business environment in an area. Microfinance replicates that, the banking relationship and the kind of peer support relationship, but on a very micro scale and in a way that's kind of comfortable for a poor woman. And I've been in Bangladesh, other places where a woman might have started very slowly, but over time her credit needs might have reached $1,000, $2,000 a year. She pays down that loan every year, gets a new loan. Business grows. Children end up going to university, whereas she had never been to any one day of classes. So you have a possibility of a real generational shift in poverty for people that work hard and join good solidarity groups and get good service, and we find that to happen quite often.
I'm curious, having worked myself with organizations that provide microfinance opportunities, it's always exciting to see somebody who is helping himself or herself, but it's in some ways even more exciting to see them succeed to the point that they begin employing others. Do you have a sense of, in addition to the people who have been helped by your programs, how many others they've helped, either through bringing them into microfinancing opportunities or actually employing them?
Well, I've certainly seen many cases, a few come to mind, in India and the Philippines, where a woman might over time come to employ 20 people, 25 people. Some of that's seasonal, so it fluctuates. Some of it's pretty steady employment. But a more typical case is a woman borrows money, and let's say she's on her third or fourth loan cycle, borrowing a couple $100s, and that's enough for her to have enough work for her husband, and after school, and for her children to do a little part-time work. And so it's really a family business in most cases. And they might, during a high season for their business, they might employ someone. But beyond family members, I probably would say that the average microenterprise probably doesn't employ more than one person. But again, we're talking about 150 million of them. And in some rare cases, it gets much bigger than that. What's more interesting to me, I spent a lot of time living in Bangladeshi villages, is it also changes the women's sense of their place in society. They actually found that a woman who gets a microloan, the likelihood that she has input into family decisions and even community decisions is 8 times higher if she's a microloan client than if she's not. And so getting the full benefit of the kind of the women's perspective at the family and the community level to help make better decisions with a more kind of gender balance in the kind of orientation, that also is a huge thing, and particularly for a Muslim society like Bangladesh. Interestingly, microfinance has thrived in a lot of Muslim societies where women's empowerment, and there was always an element of it in place, and you start injecting something as simple as capital and it can unleash it in a way that very surprising to a lot of us with some very rigid views of what the world is like for a Muslim woman. There's actually a lot of flexibility, a lot of very leaders there, and again, capital can unleash that leadership.
So you're talking about not just changing and reshaping economic opportunities, but societal opportunities.
Exactly, and what people think is possible for themselves, for their children. Imagine Grameen clients, their children, who see from their earliest years their mother representing the family to the bank, because almost all of the Grameen borrowers are women, getting involved in business, going to the market, doing a lot of non-traditional things. And then children start to say, well, I don't need to be because it's one thing to say to a child, you can do anything, you can break some of the taboos in our society, and all societies have taboos, ours does. But to see your parents, especially your mother, breaking them right in front of your eyes as a way to kind of uplift the family, that has real implications, and especially when you do it on a big scale. A lot of successes in international humanitarian work are very isolated. 10 villages in India, 15 villages in Philippines. Great work, studied, and people make their academic careers writing about it, but it just stays there. And what Mohammed Yunus has done, and what we've tried to bring to other geographies and other countries, is to do something pretty simple at its core, but to do it on a massive scale. And when you do anything on a massive scale, whether it's the internet, or whether it's any kind of social or economic innovation, it changes society in all sorts of visible ways and all sorts of invisible ways. And that's what we've seen from microfinance, and the social scientists are starting to tell us more and more about that.
You mentioned children. Whenever I travel, I get a kick out of what I call the junior entrepreneurs, these incredibly young kids who are out there trying to come up with a different way to make a living and to help their families. Is there a minimum age for someone to be considered for a microfinance loan?
Typically, in most countries that I'm in, you need to have someone who's an adult, which typically means someone who's, particularly for a woman, someone who's married, and a marriage can happen fairly young. But by the late teen years, a woman, married or unmarried, as long as she's in, people don't tend to lend to young people in school, because they should be focused on their studies. But by that point, late teens, and I've seen borrowers as old as in their 60s or 70s for different economic activities. And so, and again, it allows people, some Grameen clients have never worked for anyone else. They've only worked for themselves and their family business that they were able to finance from a Grameen loan. And one of the things that you see them working very hard to do is to generate the surplus, so that their children have the ability to pursue their education as far as they want, and to create more options for them, whether it's options in entrepreneurship, working for the government, or working in the private sector for someone else. And it's very exciting to see when you see people dropping out of school and working in these very low-wage jobs, undercapitalized businesses. That can really be a kind of a trap, a poverty trap. But with the capital and the other inputs that Grameen, you can be doing some of the same things, but just earning more, and it can become more of a liberating experience.
As you know, in times of recession and depression, the poor are disproportionately affected. Have you seen that to be the case in this so-called Great Recession? Are there more people coming to you looking for loans than before? And are the resources adequate to meet their needs?
Well, microfinance has been able to weather this recession, the global financial crisis, the global food crisis, pretty well. And during these times of difficulty, it's when you're dependent upon kind of foreign trade, or you're dependent upon kind of government pump priming of the economy, you're vulnerable. But here you're talking about a fairly closed system, where the most kind of progressive MFIs, they lend to the poor, but they're actually lending money that has been deposited by the poor. So financing doesn't really become an issue from the outside. And microfinance organizations like Grameen has $1 billion in loans outstanding. It has another $500 million beyond that in deposits. So Grameen can be responsive to the needs of the poor, and if their credit needs go up or down in a recession, can just adjust. And money is no problem, because if you pay competitive rates, savings is also something the poor want, and savings generates the money to make the loans.
When you think about the future, are there new areas, geographic areas, or new types of microfinance that you're contemplating at this point?
Well, we've had a lot of success in India, a few other places. We're we really want to focus. Sub-Saharan Africa is a big priority for us. We're right now working in 4 countries in a very serious way. Also, I have a personal and organizational commitment to microfinance in Haiti. We see that despite being a kind of so-called failed state, that there's enormous potential to apply the microfinance strategy there. So we're trying to now go for some of the countries that have been left off of the microfinance revolution. And we're also trying to couple microfinance with other kind of human development services, which we can do at a much lower cost than if they were done independently. Things like educational scholarships or health education or health services, or bringing people into the kind of the digital age, bridging the digital divide. Microfinance is an infrastructure and has relationships in most of the world's villages and urban slums, and is a very good vehicle for changing mindsets among the poor and bringing new opportunities, whether it be educational, business, or otherwise.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Counts, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you. For the Global Perspective Show, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.
This program was made possible by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office.